Hey, this is Evan Marcatz, dating coach for smart, strong, successful women, your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast, where you can learn everything there is to know about dating, relationships, sex, and men from a man's point of view. And you can find a relationship that makes you feel safe, heard, and understood, which is what it's all about. Little housekeeping. I did an episode last week. I think this is a really great continuation of that theme. We'll talk about it in great detail in this podcast. I don't want to get into the details of the last podcast because I know there's always controversy when you're talking about other people. And again, I made an assiduous point to not say anything really negative about any individual. I think there's a lot of good people out there. I think there's a lot of well-intentioned advice, and I just want you to be able to determine for yourself whether your needs are being met and whether you're coming from a place that is trusting and positive or more mistrusting and negative, and ask where mistrusting and negative gets anybody in relationships. So, logical follow-up to last week. We were talking about the difference between the different kinds of advice you can listen to on the wide world of the internet. There's virtual support of other women, which I think has value. I have a private Facebook group for my clients, and I think it's a wonderful community, but it is a community where I have an active presence and I am monitoring and trying to keep the mood balanced. And then there are obviously forums with a lot more people, but all of them are women, and all of them have a lot of negative experiences with men that they bring to bear as the lens through which they view their relationships. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think the world needs all different voices, and they all have value. And you could do a both end. You could have a presence in women's world, and you can have a presence in man's world. I think the reason I'm doing this podcast and having this conversation with you today is because I just had an incident that I guess made me think about the unique value of having a mentor in your life, not just virtual advice. And so there's a reader, listener who's been on my mailing list for 5 years. I have a database that shows when people have given me their email address, and so you could see she's 1,500 days or so on my mailing list. And after 1,500 days of listening to me, she finally decided to reach out for coaching. We did like a 15-minute call, sort of a preemptive call to figure out if she was a good fit. Then we scheduled a 1-hour session where I would really be evaluating whether she was a good fit to work with me for 6 months. There's a procedure because she has to choose me, I have to choose her. It's a little bit like dating. And so she's lovely. She's really bright. She's really interesting. She's really articulate about her feelings, knows herself, has done the work, really ready for love. So after our first 15-minute introductory session, we booked an hour to talk a few days later. That hour blocked on my calendar, Google Calendar, through Zoom. I get on Zoom, I'm like this, with this on camera, waiting for her. Time comes, she doesn't show up. 5 minutes go by. I call, I text, I send an email with the Zoom link. Hey, it's me. I'm waiting for you on Zoom. I'm basically being stood up on our date. Suddenly, 40 minutes have gone by. I'm no longer waiting on Zoom. I could take the hint. And then I get an email back, and here's the actual text of the email. Hey, Evan, I'm sorry to miss this call. I completely forgot because I hooked up with a guy last night, and I'm only now just heading home. This isn't a great week for me to be trying to get this ball rolling. I'm too much in carefree vacation mode. And here's the key. If I have maxed out your patience, I completely understand. That was the last line of what she wrote to me. If I have maxed out your patience, I completely understand. Here's what I wrote back seconds later. Life happens. No judgment for hooking up. No judgment for being in vacation mode. No judgment for missing the call. I offered you my phone number because I left this hour for you and felt it would be easier to talk than to do anything via email. If you don't call me, if you don't follow up with me, it would seem to me that you're intentionally pulling away from a guy who is demonstrating patience and consistency with you. And if you pull away from me when my job is to help you, It is indicative of perhaps your choices with men. Understand, I am not trying to convince you that you need a coach. You already know that you do. I'm giving you an opportunity to change the arc of your life. She replied in short order, and I'm reading this because I think getting the exact verbiage is important. Evan, I can tell I am not your first potential client. That has been hard to pin down. Missing the call this morning was genuinely just a screw up on my part, and then I dragged my feet to follow up, to open up my email to see what you wrote even, because I was afraid of getting yelled at. An annoying vestige of growing up with an emotionally abusive dad, I guess. Sorry on both accounts. It's not your fault, and me being evasive is not something you should have to deal with. I appreciate your calm and patient reply and the opportunity to still be coached by you. I would love to continue the conversation. This woman is now my client, and in the few weeks we've been working together, I felt really close to her, right? Because we had this incident where she stood me up, I held that space for her to come back. I proved myself worthy of her trust because I wasn't like her dad. I didn't berate her. I understood that she's going through something, and that if she was on my mailing list for 5 years, she resonates with what I have to say and actually wants help, but is pulling away. We did a podcast a few episodes about people who are stuck, and they claim to want change, but they stay stuck in their patterns. And this seemed to be just one of those patterns of someone who really wants to reach out for love and for mentorship, but pulled away because it was too scary and it was too real. And the easiest thing to do would be to continue the pattern of messing around with emotionally unavailable men. And so when we talked, and again, I'm not outing her, this is a pretty common story, I would never give private information. She told me her background, and again, I think this is relevant. It's why I share it on this podcast. Her father was an alpha, handsome, charismatic, hard driving, not a particularly good husband, not a particularly good father, very critical, but not terribly emotionally available. And her whole life, this client, again, I don't think this is an unusual situation. My client strove to achieve, to impress her father, to prove her worth. But all of the effort she made didn't turn him into a better man. So she became this super, independent alpha striver, like her dad, to be like her dad, to impress her dad, to get the love of her dad. And she never really got the love and approval of her dad. And she continued on that path for her entire life, somewhat consciously, somewhat unconsciously. And so she has a pattern, like we all have patterns. She's attracted to handsome, accomplished, athletic guys who don't necessarily want the same thing that she does. Monogamy, consistency, family, a soft place to land. She has not been choosing those men. And so as a result, she's made it to her 40s after a string of relationships with men who are, in no particular order, the best sex of her life, long distance relationships, and literally different countries, guys who don't want marriage, guys who don't want children, guys who do not put her needs first. This is her pattern. And so she compensates. She's got a really busy life. She does some really cool stuff. She travels a lot, fascinating hobbies and friends. I mean, I really love talking to her on the phone. But she's missing out on one thing that she really wants, which is love and marriage and family and that domestic bliss, the thing that I talk about. My weekends are, watching a movie with my tween kids on Friday night and going upstairs and making love. And then Saturday is like a soccer practice and a pool party and dinner with a couple friends and sitting around the fire pit, drinking wine until late at night and having some great conversation. And it's this really easy life that I know a lot of people have. You don't necessarily need to get married to do that, but it's a thing that people want. And I don't think that's something that anybody needs to be embarrassed about. Right? But she's missing out, and she knows she's missing out because she's been flying solo for so long. This is her beat. She almost doesn't realize how achievable her goal is. Right? But she definitely realizes that doing things Her way on her own wasn't working, right? This is a pattern. This is the track that she's been on since her early 20s. And 20 years into that, she knows that there's a course of inertia, and that if she doesn't do something to push her out of her inertia, she could be on my mailing list 5 years from now and be in the exact same position, but not even have the chance to have a family. So that is why she reached out. So this whole story is not per se a plug for coaching, although it could be read that way. This is only to say, to acknowledge the truth of the situation. Life is hard. It just is. And it's a crazy, chaotic world. The news is a shit show. Pandemic and climate change and dating apps and democracy and there's just bad vibes out in the world right now, which are important to acknowledge, which is why it's so important that when you zoom out, you see all the bad stuff. But when you zoom in, you could create your little paradise on Earth, right? That is your nuclear family. That's the closest people that you surround yourself with. And if you have to do everything yourself, as most single people do, men and women alike, it's a drain. It's a drain on your energy. It's a drain on your time. It's a drain on your emotions, because you have to make the money and you have to make the plans and you have to cook and do the dishes. You have to do the research for the vacation. You have to figure out how to fix what's broken. You have to learn to deal with your own emotions when your head hits the pillow at the end of the day by yourself. You have to stay strong by yourself. You have to keep it all going. You are Atlas and you are carrying the world on your shoulders. And wouldn't it be nice to just take it off and have some guy bear 50% of the burden of all of those things? Of course it would. It's exhausting to do everything yourself, even if it's your default setting. Right? And so that's the whole reason that I do this job. So you don't have to go at it alone. You don't have to feel afraid. You don't have to be paralyzed. You don't even have to trust your own judgment with men, because you can trust my judgment with men. You can be part of a group of women who are dealing with the same issues, who are proactively solving those issues in real time. You get to see the growth of other women and yourself. And I am there holding your hand the entire time, in your corner, cheering you on, validating your experience, holding your hand, answering your questions, right? Being all the things, again, not to show the wizard behind the curtain, but being all the things that you want from your boyfriend. Except right now you don't have an actual boyfriend. So I'm like the proxy guy who's the stepping stone to having a healthy relationship with a guy who actually puts you first, cares about you, never judges you, never abandons you. And all those fears that you have from your past that you can't help, right? My job is to break that pattern and show you in some real form, right? Not just in a Facebook group, not just in writing, in real time on coaching calls, consistently every single week, what it's like to be treated with respect and consistency, so you could raise your standards for what you come to expect from men. So you do have friends, and your friends do care about you. But you also know that you have a friend who's been married for 26 years and she hasn't thought about dating forever. You've got a mom who got divorced and never dated again. You have friends who are in unhappy relationships. You've got friends who are so negative about men that they've given up entirely. You've got friends who secretly wants you to stay single because they're single and they don't want to lose you to a guy. Right? You've got friends who make bad dating choices, and while they love you, you might not be able to rely on their advice because they haven't dialed it in. So when you look at your circle of friends, there's not too many relationship role models. Right? Certainly no one that you could call upon to be your substitute boyfriend, right? Who sees why you're a great catch and can nudge you in the right direction so that you can get the relationship of your dreams. Right? I know what it's like to be single. I've been on 300 online dates. I know what it's like to maintain a happy marriage because I've been married for almost 16 years now. So when you're making the choice of who am I going to listen to, who am I going to follow, who am I going to turn to, right? I'm glad you're listening to this podcast. I want this podcast to have hundreds of thousands of listeners rather than tens of thousands of listeners. I want to make the biggest impact I can on the largest number of women for free. But if you've been listening for free and your life hasn't changed and you don't know where to turn, I really, really encourage you to apply to Love U, join my coaching community, befriend the other women who have turned to me and have gotten results, right? And do something different with your life, not just in theory by listening, but by actually taking an action step and allowing me to take care of you. Because the big thing I noticed, the common thread through all of my clients, is that indeed no one is really taking care of you. You're taking care of maybe your kids, your ailing mom, your clients at work, your closest friends, but who is really taking care of you on a day-to-day basis? So that's the thing that, as a coach, not as an influencer, but as a hands-on coach who works with a handful of women, that's the thing that I am proud to do and I'm excited to do, and that gives me the most joy in my work, is to build a relationship with you, right, that replaces your old relationships and paradigms with men with something that's newer and more progressive and healthier and more likely to be sustainable with a partner for the rest of your life. So if you're stuck, go to evanmarckatz.com/now. Put in your name and email address, fill out a short application, get on my wait list. I'll get back to you. We'll schedule a time to talk. And I look forward to connecting with you like this on Zoom with this background, learning about you, what makes you tick, what took you here, and what you want to have happen going forward in the future, so you don't have to continue to be stuck and wonder why life is so hard and why you bear the burden of doing everything all by yourself. My name is Evan Marc Katz. This is the Love U Podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss a single episode. Leave us a positive comment, leave us a positive review, share this with a friend. It does make a difference, right? I might not be the biggest dating coach in the world at this point in time, but I really love the fact that I can impact lives tangibly, and I can see results tangibly and get wedding photos every week from someone who took my course 5 years ago and said, "Hey, Evan, I just thought I should tell you I just got married." Those are the things that I want for you, and those are the things you could have if you do something. So do something. I love you. I appreciate you. I thank you for being a part of this podcast and being part of my community. I look forward to our next conversation next week. Take care. Bye-bye.